I mean, come on, guys. You knew it was only a matter of time before I tricked one of the Babylon Bee guys into coming onto my channel. If you've been around my channel for any amount of time, you know that I love satire. I'm not very good at it, but I love it. I actually think that quality satire can be life-changing. It can take a complicated topic and shine light on the issues in a way that will help people understand it better. In some cases, I have seen people have the biggest reality check through satire than through any other means. But some Christians disagree with this. As someone who's done satire, let me correct that, very average, mediocre satire, I can attest that to some people, I have crossed a line by having a sense of humor talking about spiritual things. To them, it is not okay to joke about spiritual things or serious things, impact or not. Is this true? Does God have a sense of humor? Did Jesus ever tell a joke? Today, I had the great honor and privilege of interviewing Kyle Mann, the editor-in-chief at the Babylon Bee. Apparently, he had nothing else to do on a Monday afternoon, so grab your potatoes, your coffee, or your popcorn, or your Fanta, or something, while I ask him about these topics and more. Kyle, thank you so much for coming onto my channel and talking with me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This will be a lot of fun.
Yeah, our mutual friend Frank Turra cooked this up. You've also been on Sean McDowell's channel. And I believe one of you from the Babylon Bee went on to Elisa Childers' channel as well. So guys, be sure to check those interviews out. I will leave links in the description. But first, in case my audience is just under a rock somehow and is unaware about the Babylon Bee, what is the Babylon Bee? What are you about?
Yeah, sure. So the Babylon Bee is a Christian news satire site. Mm-hmm. So all those words have probably never been combined together in the history of creation. But yeah, it just means that we write fake news headlines that, and I say fake news, but it's satire. So what satire is you're writing kind of an alternate reality, either taking things to their logical conclusions or exaggerating things or distorting things, mm-hmm. In order to make a point. Usually there's a couple types of satire. Some satire is more focused on just absurdity and humor, and we do some of that kind of stuff. And then some satire is very pointed, and it's designed specifically to communicate a message or criticize something. So we take the headlines of the day, whatever's happening, either whether that's in the church or politics or everyday life, and we just kind of put a humorous spin on it, and we write it in a dry, satirical, newsy sort of voice. So it's kind of like there's a reporter in your house, like watching you and and reporting on what you're doing. So we launched in 2016, and it's just been explosive growth ever since. God's really blessed us with an audience to be able to do what we do. So that's kind of what we do every day.
Yeah. Well, that's really cool. I know a lot of people enjoy satire. You know, y'all came on my radar many years ago, and I have kind of witnessed and seen that growth. So I'm really glad that, you know, there's, you know, biblically based conservative satire that people, you know, really enjoy and like, because I think people are really used to Christians being kind of dry with their sense of humor, or, you know, kind of like in Christian movies where the acting is just not good. I think some people kind of associate Christian humor with those kinds of things. So I have to say, you guys definitely break that mold.
How dare you criticize Fireproof and God's Not Dead like that?
Actually, Fireproof wasn't that bad.
So you didn't like how they made the atheist character this one-dimensional demonic guy that like gets hit by a car and dies at the end outside the Newsboys concert. That didn't.
I mean, it was really realistic, Kyle. It was so realistic.
I don't want to be too, you know, self-promotional or whatever and go like, oh yeah, Babylon Bee's awesome, everything else Christian sucks, because that's I mean, that's a tendency, right? That's a tendency we have as Christians, is to say that our art is first and foremost about being Christian or about communicating a message, and that it's not first and foremost about being good. And I think that's a real problem, is that we prioritize the kind of the didactic element of our art. You know, art serves a purpose. Art is supposed to convert people. You know, mm-hmm. You want to get somebody to text message all their friends, God's not dead, at the end of your movie, and that's your goal, mm-hmm. versus like making art that's good for the sake of making art, because God created art, God created humor, God created comedy. And just to put that out in the world is a good thing that is glorifying to God. As long as you're not violating certain things or going over certain lines, I'm sure we'll talk about. But that's what we do as Christians. Everything we do is worship. So if you make a good, look at like Mel Gibson, who's Catholic, but he goes and he makes a movie about Hacksaw Ridge, about the soldier who the Seventh-day Adventist who was a conscientious objector in World War II, and you have this great story of faith. There's no altar call at the end. There's no there's no like sign up for your local Catholic church or whatever. but it's like, but there is a spiritually like true and interesting story that's being told, and it's told for the sake of telling the story. And I think we, and especially Protestants, have been bad at that over the years for whatever reason.
Yeah, I think I'm glad that you mentioned it as art, because it really kind of seems like that, right? And you're right, everything is worship. In a way, it's like we can kind of take our personalities that have humor and have like an artistic worship bent on it. I like the way that that's kind of put, is that it can be used for the glory of God. And I think that ultimately, I think that's the Babylon Bee's goal. And I know y'all have been, I don't know, I don't want to say criticized, but maybe more focused on not just Christian things, but also political things as well, like conservative things. And I think good satire takes both conservative and liberal, points and makes fun of them both.
Yeah, it's kind of amazing. When we went around the office a few weeks ago, and I was asking people like, what is the Babylon Bee to you, and what do you think the Babylon Bee is, or what attracted you to the Babylon Bee in the first place? And of the dozen writers and producers and stuff that we have in this office, it was the number one thing people were saying was the Babylon Bee to me is a community where I felt like I was alone in the world. I was the only one who had this wry sense of humor about things, or the only one who was a little jaded from politics in the Christian world. And then I saw the Babylon Bee came on the scene in 2016 during the 2016 election, and I was like, oh, I'm not the only one. It's okay to be a weird, goofy Christian. It's okay to be someone who holds views that are countercultural. Yeah. And you can do that and have fun. Like, you don't have to be dour, and you don't have to be angry, and you don't have to be bitter all the time. You can have a lot of fun while kind of taking a stand against culture, and against the way that culture's going. So it's been cool to see that. It has been cool to see that we can kind of turn that narrative on its head, that Christians are the fuddy-duddies. Yeah. It's probably fuddy-duddy to even say fuddy-duddy, but
sounds like a name of a candy bar.
Yeah, I love fuddy-duddies. They're my favorite.
They're delicious. There's an aspect of myself that is a fuddy-duddy that can still, relate to other Christians. I think that that's really relieving. It's interesting that that's how they felt. Like, am I the only weirdo, that's making jokes?
There's this weird trend in culture too, that like it's not okay to be like, you don't want to be out of step with the current trends. Like, don't laugh at anything that's cringe, or don't laugh at boomer humor. Like, it's a derogatory. Like, people say Babylon Bees and boomer humor. I'm like, well, I'm glad we're boomer humor and not Gen Z humor, because whatever that Gen Z humor is doesn't make any sense to me. And there's a sense in which it's like, it's okay to just tell the dad joke and laugh at the dad joke. Like, I think that's a good thing. And I don't know, our culture tends to want to subvert and mock everything, to where you're just tearing everything down, and it's like, it's not okay to laugh at that. Don't be too weird. Don't be the guy who's out there laughing at this or that. So, I mean, there's certain things you're not supposed to make fun of. There's our culture has its sacred cows and its idols that you're not allowed to mock, and it's like, oh, that's weird. Don't make fun of that, and so I like that we can tell people, no, you can laugh at things that are ridiculous.
Yes. Yeah. And there's a relief in that as well. You mentioned before the definition of satire. I actually wrote this down. Tell me if you agree or disagree with this. I have an awkward disclaimer. I call it an awkward disclaimer, but it says, this is satire. The definition of satire is an artistic form of using wit, humor, exaggeration, irony, or sarcasm to show people's folly with the intent to inspire change. Do you agree with that definition?
For For the one kind of satire, yes, and I don't remember what they are. There's two kinds of satire that that people have, philosophers and linguists have identified, and one of them is the more is the goofy kind of satire where we do, we'll do something like on husbands and wives not being able to finish improvement projects, like something like that. And that's not, I think that doesn't fit in that bucket of, with the intent to inspire change qualifier that's on there. Like, because some things are not, some satire the Babylon Bee does, some satire you see out in the world isn't meant to like accomplish this great purpose or totally, we totally owned the libs with this one,
Yeah.
like some of it is meant to just, I think, instill invoke a sense of humor about the mundane things in life that I think is okay. Like, I think that's a good, noble goal, to have to take yourself lightly. I think God wants us to take ourselves lightly in a lot of scenarios and in a certain way. So I think the stuff that we do that like kind of, maybe makes fun of worship leaders or makes fun of some silly thing that churches do in small group, or the way that Christians say just all the time when they pray, it's like, we're not sitting there making this like savage point, like, oh, brutal, yeah, you said just when you pray all the time, you need to stop that.
Yeah.
It's meant to instill kind of a loving a love of the church, and ability to kind of laugh at ourselves and go, yeah, we are kind of ridiculous, but not in a way that necessarily inspires some kind of big societal change. The other kind of satire is what you're talking about, and I do agree, it is something that you use irony, you use contrast, you use distortion, exaggeration, all of those tools to take something and just kind of stretch it to its logical conclusion. It's seen as the one conservative joke, but the whole, like, the identifies as movement and the jokes in that vein, like we have the video on our YouTube channel of the motorcyclist who identifies as a bicyclist and then crushes all the bicyclists in the bicycle race, and it's like, and you're just taking a belief system that's ridiculous on its face, and you're just saying, okay, well, if that, then why not this?
Yeah.
like the video you're talking about. If you really did do this, then what would it look like?
It's a logic thing.
Yeah, and its logical conclusion, right?
Yeah.
So I agree with that in that sense. Yeah.
Cool. That, I learned something new. I didn't realize that there's two different types, and I guess I never really thought about it that far, but you're right, where it's there's fun satire, kind of where you're jesting, right? Where it's just like sibling love kind of thing. And then there's the satire that is supposed to kind of get people to think and try to get them to see, hey, do you see this? Whenever it's put in a different perspective. I know that you've probably gotten, because you guys do satire, you do this, and you're Christians, I'm positive that you've gotten maybe a few people that just don't believe in this stuff, right? Or maybe they think that this is disrespectful, that this is not something that God would approve of, which I think we obviously disagree with. But as a Christian who does satire, do you believe that that's true? Like, do you believe that God has a sense of humor? Did Jesus laugh? Do you think that he told jokes? Do you think that the disciples told jokes to each other, and because sometimes I believe that, we're made in the image of God and we're hilarious. Like, humans are funny, and we can have some really good belly laughs. And it makes me wonder, if we possess that quality of laughter, humor, joy, it would seem strange if God didn't, because then we would have something positive and joyful that God didn't have, and so those are just things that I was thinking about. But what do you think about those things?
Yeah, it's something I've thought about a lot. So apologies if this is lengthy, but so it's a multifaceted question, so it's a multifaceted answer. On the one hand, yes, God created humor. I think God does have a sense of humor. I think Jesus did have a sense of humor. You can see Jesus' sense of humor in his parables, and you can see it in a lot of the ways that he would like almost like rap battle with the Pharisees, and like, that's probably blasphemy. But the way that he would diss the Pharisees, with these like savage comebacks, and everybody was just like, oh no, dang, he didn't, he got moted. I think I don't know if the kids say moted anymore, but so I
I
think,
don't know either. We're not
I mean,
cool.
but on the other hand, like Jesus was on a mission, right? So he wasn't necessarily here to do that. That wasn't the goal. It was, he's the man of sorrows. So I think I think, yes, Jesus had a sense of humor, but I do think we can take that too far and say like, oh, he was telling fart jokes with the disciples all the time. I don't necessarily think that, but he was God very God and is God very God and man very man. So every element of the human experience up to and not including sin, is something that he experienced. So yeah, he would have experienced humor and a sense of humor, and he partied with everybody. And so yes, God has a sense of humor. You can go back to the prophets and you can see them using satire and humor to make points, even when they're conveying the very words of God. So if we believe Isaiah is communicating the very words of God to us, when Isaiah uses irony or humor or exaggeration, then that's the words of God, and God is using those things to communicate to mankind. God also created mankind to be in relation to him, and so I don't think he'd create this whole like something that's a huge part of our lives, like humor. Ever since you're 1 or 2 years old and your parents are tickling you and you're laughing, or they're playing peekaboo with you and you're laughing, like that's such a huge part of and foundational part of the human experience that I don't think that God creates that and then God just doesn't understand it or has no like capacity to relate to that sense of humor at all. We're the image of God, so that's part of him and his character as well. But going back to Isaiah, when he's talking about he's trying to call Israel to change in terms of idol worship, because this is the one sin that Israel could never shake all the way up until the Babylonian captivity. They just constantly worshipped idols, and God just uses the prophets to just mock Israel, in a way that's like it's loving and is meant to inspire change. But in one passage, Isaiah writes that he's talking about an idol carver who goes out into the woods and chops down a tree, and he says that he chops the tree and chops the log in half, and he burns one side for firewood, and the other side he carves into a god for himself to worship. And Isaiah basically satirically asked the question, how do you know that he didn't get that backwards and accidentally burn his god, and now he's worshiping firewood?
Yeah.
So he uses this funny example to show how ridiculous it is to worship created things. You can look at some of the object lessons the prophets did, like laying on their side in the middle of the village for 180 days or whatever.
Yeah.
Go marry a prostitute, and I'll show you what Israel's like. That's funny. Elijah calling down fire from heaven. He tells the prophets of Baal are trying to call down fire and they can't, and he says, well, maybe your God's going to the bathroom, or maybe he just took off on a trip, maybe he'll be back soon. Like there's a there's a humor and to that. So anyway, all of that to say, the other side of it though is obviously I think there is a danger as Christians to use satire in the wrong way. And I say this fully aware that my job is to write satire, but to do it too much, maybe, or do it in a way that starts to feed into your own personal ego or sense of I'm better than everyone because my job is to mock people and put them down. I think there's a danger in doing that in the wrong way or too often in a way that's bad for our souls. If you look at C.S. Lewis, he when he wrote the Screw Tape Letters, which is a brutal satire of the way that Christians fall to temptation. And you can read it and you can laugh and go, oh, that's so true. I do that same thing in my life. That's how I deceive myself. That's how Satan deceives me. But he had to write in the voice of a demon to write Screw Tape Letters. And he said afterwards that he didn't want to write any more Screw Tape because he had to think like a demon to write like a demon. So I think that's the danger, right? Is that we're writing from a mock liberal perspective or a mock, ridiculous conservative perspective, or we're writing, we did a video recently that was Satan responding to the Roe v. Wade decision. So it's like I had to write a script as though I was Satan, and it was silly. It wasn't like
it's like method acting.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So it's like, what would Satan say? So I don't know if that's a healthy exercise all the time. So so there is a danger. I think the cure for the Christian is obviously like to have a good balance about it. For us, it's like work-life balance of going, yes, my job is to write this stuff on everyday life, but that's not who I am. I have to separate that. And then also like those two different types of satire. Write the loving stuff, write the stuff that connects with you, even though you also have to put out the other stuff that's more commenting on a worldview event as well. Hopefully that kind of answered your
no, that was
your question.
That was great, man. Thank you. Yeah, and especially that last part, it resonates. What would you suggest? So in ministry, I mean, because the direct definition of ministry is serving others, like service. And I always think, like my service to others requires me to take care of myself, but requires me to have a certain responsibility, having a platform, right? It can be it can take a toll on your mental health sometimes though, right? Like you got to say no, you got to know what your boundaries are. In this aspect though, like say it is like method acting in a way, like you kind of have to get into character. You got to have to put yourself in somebody else's perspective to write a good storyline. What advice would you give to someone or the average Christian on how to stay emotionally and spiritually healthy while doing that? Like, what do you guys do to kind of counteract that happening?
Yeah, I think kind of as I was saying before, the need to know yourself to the point where like I'm getting too bitter about this issue.
Like a self-awareness.
Yeah, an awareness. Yeah. I think you can tell, like when certain writers of ours will be pitching ideas, and it's like they're pitching, and they're like trying to like really get a slam dunk on this issue or this or that issue, and it's like we really want to make this point about abortion, and I feel like when that starts to get into the bad Christian content arena, when you're so like driven to like we really need to make this point, and then. So at that point, I can kind of tell like someone's pitches just aren't that funny anymore because it's like I'm obsessed with driving this point home.
Yeah.
So at that point, you need to step back or tell that person to step back and say like, hey, why don't you write a fun, listicle about husbands and wives? Like that I think that gives us that sense of our actual importance and our actual place in the universe, versus like make fun of yourself, write something that makes fun of yourself. And I think that's a good exercise is like, if I find myself getting too much in the mode of like, I got to own the libs, that's the point where I have to go like, no, I'm going to write something about Calvinists because I'm a Calvinist, and I'm going to mock Calvinists.
You're a Calvinist, Kyle?
I am. Indeed,
all right. This interview's over. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, I know. But
I'm judging you.
Yeah, it wasn't my choice. I think it's like being able to mock myself for that, or like because Calvinists are jerks, right? So I can make fun of Calvinists for being jerks, even though I am one. I think that's a good. Oh, and by the way, we wrote a bunch of Calvinist satire when the Bee launched, making fun of Calvinists, and we're Calvinists, and we had we all aren't Calvinists, but the first couple of guys at the Bee were, and we got a lot of hate mail from Calvinists, that are like, obviously this site is run by Arminians, and it's like, no, we're making fun of ourselves. That's the whole, so I think that's a good sign that your satire is on target. Like you're making fun of yourself, and then the people who are like you are mad at you, and you're like, no, we're making
fun, guys. I never would have known were Reformed Calvinists. I'm like, speaking of making fun of ourselves, I have a friend who's like, you're too, what did he say? Like basically that I'm to my charismatic friends, I'm too reformed, but to my reformed friends, I'm too charismatic. Like,
right. Well, and I'm that way too. Like the Calvinists bug me, So if I'm sitting in a group of Calvinists, I'm like, screw you guys, and I'll argue against them, even though I kind of agree with them, And then if I'm a bunch of Arminians, I'm like, no, I'm going to be based. I'm 5-point Calvinist, man, and like, so I just waffle based on who I'm with because I want to be contrarian.
I think that's the point, though, is that you kind of your audience really well. And that is good advice. I think that's actually kind of brilliant to like write and make fun of yourself. That keeps you humble. That's good. I'm going to have to pocket that away.
There was a guy at The Onion that he had written he like writes now on how to write jokes or how to write comedy, or he like just speaking engagement with podcasts and stuff on how to write jokes. I forget which guy it was. And he had a form that was like, how to write a joke or how to write an Onion headline, and it was like, it's helpful or whatever. It's like, what
Mhm.
topic is it on? What aspect do you want to make fun of? Asking you questions to get you in the mode to think like, where's my joke going to go? But there's a part I didn't agree with on it, and it was like under it said like what are your strong feelings about this topic? What is the strong point that you want to make? And I feel like that doesn't lend itself to good comedy, because I feel like the point kind of comes along with it. Like if you have beliefs, they're going to come out in it. But I feel like if you specifically go, I want to write a joke that mocks this and makes this point, and I have a strong opinion, I want to come out. I feel like it's how you get the smarmy like late night, hosts and the bad liberal comedy that we see nowadays, is by saying too strong. Not that we don't want to make a point. Obviously, a lot of our satire makes a point, but I think if you feel too strongly about that, like I really need to push this, that's where it goes. So going back to the full circle about how to keep yourself humble, I think it is kind of detaching yourself from that and going, what's the best joke we can tell? What's going to bring the most humor? What's going to bring the most laughter, regardless of if it's making fun of me or making fun of someone on the outside.
Yeah, it sounds like it's a combination of common sense logic and having a high emotional intelligence.
Sure.
Yeah, like just being able to control that aspect of your feelings to make a point where you're not getting so involved that, you're married to the topic.
Right.
You're just dating casually,
DTR,
it's nothing serious. Yeah. So I have two more basic questions for you. You mentioned before about, God, having a sense of humor. There's lines that you cross though. In your opinion, when does it become distasteful? Like when does it become sinful to do satire for the Christian?
Well, sin always boils down to the motivations of the heart. So obviously you can write satire that's fine on the surface, but if your heart was in the wrong place, like you really wanted to, I don't know, make yourself feel like you're better than everybody by writing it, then, but in terms of like in a vacuum, like when is the satire itself, as an object separated from the author, when does that go too far? It is a moving target because there's this, line in comedy about not crossing the line, not going over the line. The struggle, especially for the Christian, is that comedy has to go over the line because comedy is about subverting expectations. And so a large part of the laughter is the, oh crap, did they just go there? Like, they went there. Like I wouldn't go there. They went there. There's an element where it is kind of that slight bit of edginess. But for the Christian, I think there is there's a line and then there's a second line,
Yeah.
There's the line of like kind of good manners and taste. That's like, oh, they went a little bit, they towed that line. But then there's a line of sinfulness, like where obviously we're not going to do stuff that's, heavy on cursing or, obviously things that promote sin. For us, there's not too many hard and fast rules. It depends on the topic. I think the seriousness of your tone needs to match the seriousness of the topic. So like if you're going to do something on a very heavy topic like abortion, your joke has to be really good and it has to match that. Like you can't, we learned this early on. We did a joke very early on at the B that was like, I don't remember, like Planned Parenthood offers 2-for-1 abortions, or something like that. And it was so, we learned quickly, like, it sounds like a silly, lighthearted joke. And it doesn't sound like we're absolutely like slamming abortion. It's not clear that we're doing that. It's like, are they just being funny? Like abortion's not funny. Why are you being funny about abortion?
Yeah.
So I think if you get too much on the lighthearted side with a serious topic, that's when you kind of get this disconnect where people are like, oh, that's out of the bounds of good taste. So we just learned the lesson in the trenches. We do something and we're like, everybody hated that. And you're like, why did they hate that? The joke wasn't good enough. We didn't really weigh the risks against how good this joke was, because you can do a joke that hits on a current topic and it's a sensitive topic and it can do really well and it can be really good, but you have to make sure that that it's worth it. Is it worth the blowback that you're going to receive for it? It's a question every comedian has to ask. Yeah,
I think that's it's a really good way to put it. And my apologies, guys, if you can hear I have a really obnoxiously loud air conditioner, so I apologize if everybody can hear it, but that's what that is, in case you're wondering.
I can't hear it, and we are we jumped on the grenade for you and we turned
Oh,
off our air conditioning.
dude,
So
thanks, man. What a
I'm
pal.
sitting in an 80-degree room right now for you.
You know what? I am honored. I'm humbled that you are probably sweating through your shirt for this interview. Thank you, Kyle.
Exactly.
This is what friends do, guys. Friend goals. Um, and I do have one more question for you. I was actually really excited because I was just casually scrolling through Instagram. I follow you guys on Instagram, in which, by the way, guys, I'll leave all their socials in the description as well, so you guys can check them out. I was scrolling and I saw that you are coming out with a book, the postmodern, is it the postmodern Pilgrims Progress or the modern
Yes.
Pilgrims Progress?
Yeah, postmodern Pilgrims Progress. Yeah.
The reason why I was so excited is that is one of my favorite books. Like we watch the animated version every year on Easter. And I love the animated movie. I love the book. I love everything about it. And so I was so excited that you were writing it. I would love for you to tell my audience about that book, what it's about, and when it will be out.
Yeah. Well, it's out now. So
it is.
Yeah, you can get it now. Yeah. So I mean, I'm getting chills just thinking about it. The original Pilgrim's Progress that you're talking about, just the journey of Christian, from the city of destruction and like leaving his family and going out on the narrow road, and then all the crazy stuff that he goes through. It's always been one of my favorite books, probably like Bible, Lord of the Rings, and then the Pilgrim's Progress.
Oh man,
like
yes,
the trilogy.
Yes.
And so I always wanted to do a modern version. I actually made, when I was like in junior high, I made or sixth grade or something, I made a Pilgrim's Progress board game, and I had like all these crazy rules and cards and dice, and I was like, oh, you go and you fight. It was terrible, but I loved the conceit of Pilgrim's Progress, that you take the Christian life and you put it in this allegory, a very simple journey down the road, and he encounters people that are one-to-one allegories for people in real life, one-to-one analogs for people in real life. It's such a good conceit, and I was shocked that nobody had ever modernized it. Like there are some modernizations, but they're mostly like just for language, or they'll kind of like update some terms or make it, I don't know, a little more modern day in terms of the setting. But nobody had ever done like a full like sequel rewrite. I guess the closest would be C.S. Lewis, who did Pilgrim's Regress. But it was kind of his weird like mythological take on it or something. I got to reread Regress. But anyway, so we took the basic conceit of Pilgrim's Progress, an allegory for the Christian life. We gave it a kind of Babylon Bee humorous twist, where we're taking a lot of the kind of figures and celebrities that we target on the Babylon Bee and making those into like, what if that was in real life?
Yeah.
So in the early on, Christian, or our guy's name is Ryan. Ryan is sinking in this swamp of depression, and you have a character who's this prosperity gospel preacher that comes up, and he's like telling him to believe in himself. And as he's like sinking in the swamp, and he's like, no, he's like, I need somebody to save me, pick me up out of the swamp. And the preacher guy's like, no, just you really need to pull yourself up by your bootstraps, and like just think more positively, stop speaking negativity into your life, and it's just getting deeper and deeper. And so those kind of like humorous allegories throughout the book. And we gave it like the sci-fi fantasy crazy multiverse sort of twist that's just been a lot of fun, and it was a lot of fun to write. So that's the book, and yeah, it's out now.
Cool. Yeah, it's one of those things where have you ever seen a book or something written, a video maybe, and you think, I'm kind of jealous I didn't think of that first. That's kind of my first, third thought when I saw the book. I'm like, that's brilliant. That is so brilliant, because it is like what modern Christians do deal with. And we will always deal with, what's the original author's name? Paul.
Yeah. Bunyan, John Bunyan. Yeah.
John Bunyan.
Paul Bunyan is
read that John and Paul Bunyan. Oh my word.
Paul Bunyan that was one of our original Babylon Bee. One of our first Babylon Bee articles was Paul Bunyan voted favorite Puritan or something. It was like the big guy with the axe.
John Bunyan. Yeah, okay, so I'm not the only one that happens with. My word, I do that, even though it's like one of my favorite books. But it's what he wrote about, we will always have to deal with as Christians. Thank you for telling us all about that. Thank you for coming on. Thank you for taking the time to be all fancy and get in the studio and sweat for this interview. Is there anything else that you would like to tell my audience about you the Babylon Bee, or anything else in general?
No, just well, I'll say no and then I'll say yes. No, but yeah, you go ahead and you feel free to follow us on all of the social medias. We also appreciate people just go to babylonbee.com directly and you can sign up for our newsletter there, and that's where a lot of people are getting our content nowadays.
Yeah, since the Twitter ban, which you discuss with Sean McDowell, which I will leave a link to everything in the description, guys, for you to check out. I do suggest that you do check out that interview with Sean McDowell. It was a great interview, and you guys do discuss your Twitter ban and your interview with Elon Musk. So if you guys want to check that out, it'll be there. Thank you guys for tuning in.